Once again, we're on the verge of another presidential debate, and once again, the airwaves and internet are abuzz with people offering both candidates advice on what to do and what not to do. And because I have so much invested in this race already, and because I care deeply about the future of this country, I feel obliged to offer Mitt Romney some advice on what I think he needs to do to win this debate and really put the election away. I think after his convincing victory in the first debate, then he can solidify his chances of winning with a convincing victory in this last debate. It's about foreign policy, and there are seven specific things that Mitt Romney needs to hit in order to win this debate, and one specific thing I don't want him to do, but let's go through the seven things. First, obviously, this Benghazi debacle. I think that Mitt Romney really needs to hit the president first and foremost for his administration misleading the American people about what they knew and when they knew it. Specifically, since Bob Schieffer is hosting this debate, he ought to remind everybody of what Ambassador Susan Rice, speaking on behalf of the Obama administration, said on Face the Nation to Bob Schieffer the Sunday after the attack.
Based on the best information we have to date, what our assessment is as of the present is in fact what it began spontaneously in Benghazi as a reaction to what had transpired some hours earlier in Cairo, where, of course, as you know, there was a violent protest outside of our embassy sparked by this hateful video.
Did you catch that? Based on the best information that we have to date, our best assessment at present is that this was a spontaneous reaction to what happened in Cairo. Of course, that's not true. They did have information to the contrary at the time she made those statements. They were, in fact, operating under the assumption, we know, that this was terrorism. And right before Ambassador Rice said that, just a few minutes earlier on that same program, Bob Schieffer had interviewed the president of the General National Congress of Libya, for all intents and purposes, the president of Libya, and he said unequivocally that this was a pre-planned, predetermined attack. And when asked if she agreed with the president, Susan Rice said this.
Not have information at present that leads us to conclude that this was premeditated or pre-planned.
We do not have information at present that leads us to conclude that this was premeditated or pre-planned. I would memorize that exact language, quote her verbatim, so that you can throw that back at the president at the debate and say something like, "And Bob, as she told you on your program, she said, we have no information at present that this was premeditated or pre-planned, but of course we now know that they had information within 24 hours that this was a terrorist attack, and therefore it was premeditated, it was pre-planned." And she even went further than that on some other Sunday talk shows, at least one anyway.
We don't see at this point signs that this was a coordinated, planned, premeditated attack.
We don't have any signs at this point that this was a pre-planned, pre-coordinated attack. She said that on September 17th, and remember, within 24 hours of the attack, they had evidence that this was terrorism.
These protests were in reaction to a video. We have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack.
So it's clear that the administration was not honest with us. Now, this is important. Governor Romney has to be very careful to say, I'm not saying that the president should have definitively said one way or the other that it was terrorism. Obviously, you don't want to leap to conclusions. But when Ambassador Rice said, speaking on behalf of the administration, that we have no information that this was a pre-planned, premeditated attack, that was absolutely false, and we know it is false. Number two, I really think that Mitt Romney needs to hit the president for this abominable lie that they've been telling, he and his campaign have been telling, that he ended the war in Iraq. I'm sure he's going to mention it at some point during the debate, and then when Mitt Romney gets a chance to respond, he needs to just say point blank, No, Mr. President, you did not end the war in Iraq. As you well know, the ink was dry on the Status of Forces Agreement before you took office. And in fact, the reason that we were able to bring our troops home to victory was because of the successful counterinsurgency strategy that this president not only vehemently opposed, but it is offensive and insulting to the American people for this president to say that he ended the war in Iraq when he did not. I've written extensively about this on my blog. I have posted a video about it on YouTube. Mitt Romney should nail the president on this, and this actually segues into my third point that I want Mitt Romney to make, and that has to do with Afghanistan. President Obama has not clearly defined victory in Afghanistan. At least I haven't heard a clear definition from him or his White House about what victory in Afghanistan means. President Bush told us what victory in Iraq would mean, but I haven't heard the same from this president. And it also, then Senator Obama's lack of foreign policy experience showed when he opposed the surge and opposed withdrawing from Iraq based on conditions on the ground. He wanted a fixed date for withdrawal. That was foolish, and he's making the same mistake with Afghanistan. Mitt Romney's Afghanistan policy is that he wants to withdraw our troops, but that it makes no sense to set a fixed absolute date for withdrawal, regardless of conditions on the ground. If you're going to do that, then you might as well just start withdrawing troops tomorrow, because why leave them in harm's way for another 2 years if you're not even going to base your withdrawal on whether or not the country's been stabilized or not? With Iraq, what we did was we stabilized the country, and then we negotiated the Status of Forces Agreement, and that's when we set the date for withdrawal, only after the country was stabilized. So, as I understand Mitt Romney's position, he sets 2014 as a target date, but the actual withdrawal of troops will be based on conditions on the ground. A lot of people may not be able to follow the nuances, the differences between these two candidates' positions on Afghanistan, but the point to really drive home is that President Obama is making the same mistake. He's displaying the same foolish naivete with his Afghanistan policy that he did with Iraq when he was in the Senate. And he was wrong then, and he's still wrong now. Our troops in Afghanistan deserve a commander-in-chief who will give them a clear definition of victory and also make it clear that we're either not going to keep you in harm's way for another 2 years, or we are going to begin drawing down our forces once the country is stabilized. Now, number 4, while we're on the subject of the war on terror, Al-Qaeda. President Obama likes to brag about killing bin Laden. Well, Mitt Romney has a terrific comeback courtesy of General John Allen, because while Osama bin Laden may be dead, according to General Allen, Al-Qaeda has come back. This is obviously something that the administration would rather us not think about, or at least that President Obama would rather us not think about. Obviously, General Allen was very honest and very candid there, and I think that Number 5, staying in the Middle East, Israel. Now, there's obviously a lot you can legitimately attack President Obama on over Israel. Frankly, I think that as long as Mitt Romney just says things that are true and doesn't make a mistake, doesn't say anything that is factually inaccurate that people can jump all over him for, then he'll be fine. He can win the argument on Israel just by stating what the reality is. However, I do think that one thing Mitt Romney absolutely should mention is how President Obama got caught dissing Prime Minister Netanyahu to French President Nicolas Sarkozy.
Netanyahu? I hardly met him. Terrible.
Obviously, that was a big embarrassment to the U.S., and it did not help our relations with Israel any. So I think find some way to work that in. Number 6. Under President Obama, we've fallen to 7th in global competitiveness. The U.S. now ranks 7th in global competitiveness. Just a few years ago, we were 1st in the world. We are in a global economy now, and it's terrible how far we've fallen on this president's watch. And he hasn't done anything that I've noticed that would make our country more competitive as a global economic power. Hit him on that. And finally, number 7, our national debt is the greatest national security threat we currently face. None other than the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said that. So this is a great way to work in the debt to a debate that's supposed to focus on foreign policy, because according to all the polls I've seen, that is the issue on which Mitt Romney has his biggest advantage over President Obama, and for good reason. We've had our national debt increase by $5.5 trillion under this president, and this is the guy who called George W. Bush unpatriotic for adding $4 trillion to our national debt in 8 years. He's added $5.5 trillion to it in less than 4 years. Those are the 7 things that I really think Mitt Romney needs to bring up to win this debate. It doesn't matter what Obama says. Mitt Romney can win this debate if he hits those 7 points and delivers them effectively. But I do think that there is one thing that he should not mention, and that is, Governor Romney, please lay off China. I mean, yes, they're manipulating their currency. You need to designate them a currency manipulator. President Obama should have done that. That's all well and good. But I don't like all this talk about China as a cheater. It has this sentiment that this is stuff that I've heard Democrats do in Midwestern races, this thing. It just reeks of that whole yellow peril anti-Chinese sentiment that corrupted our country back in the early 20th century. I don't think that it's a winner. But yes, talk about the currency manipulation, and as far as if they ask, do you think this will provoke a trade war, then I personally am not worried about a trade war, because I don't think China is looking for a trade war. They need us to buy their products. They need us as a consumer, and it's good for them if our economy grows and thrives. I mean, just look what happened to their economy right after ours tanked. They need us, so they're not looking for a trade war. I suppose that is it. And finally, I will advise you all, please check out my blog. Also follow me on Twitter @RightWingGenius, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching. Let's hope for a good debate, and until next time, don't mess with the right-wing genius.